Kapu. Kani Kapu. Kani Kapu. Belina Manoa Pa.
Belina Manoa Ikale Ua Aloha Aloha Ua Tuahine Mai Uahine Ai Waikiki Kia Ike Kahauhani Hainona Leo Eo Kamaina Aina Alohae Manoe.
Aloha no, you're listening to DJ Ono on KTUH Honolulu 90.1 FM, Wailua 91.1 FM, channel 866, Spectrum Digital Cable, and also streaming live on KTUH.org on the World Wide Web. Again, I want to mahalo you so much for tuning in today. We have an amazing show set up for you. A quick look into the weather. Looks like today it's going to be fair, currently 78. Winds northeast, 6 miles per hour. Today, sunny, some haze in the morning, northeast winds, 10 to 15 miles per hour. 85 tonight. It looks like it's going to be mostly clear, northeast winds 10 to 15 miles per hour, 10% chance of ua, 10% chance of rain. The moon phase is looking like it's going to be a waxing crescent. Again, I want to mahalo you so much for tuning in today. We have an amazing talk story set up for you, and we have lots of things to talk about as well. We have a guest. Our guest is going to be Dr. Otto, but before that, let's totally get into this. I'm a transfer student from Kapi'olani Community College, where I earned my associate's degree in Hawaiian Studies and Liberal Arts. Additionally, I obtained a public health certificate from Kauai Community College. During my time at Kapi'olani, I served as the Student Congress President in the second year of the pandemic, leading initiatives focused on creating safe spaces on campus, addressing food insecurity, and expanding access to social services. At the University of Hawaii at Manoa, I earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Public Health and am currently pursuing my master's degree in Public Administration. At KTUH, I have the privilege of serving as your general manager. Again, I want to mahalo you so much for tuning in today and for tuning in to DJ Ono on KTUH FM. On Real Talk, I'll bring you many meaningful conversations about pressing issues in our islands. Discussions will cover topics such as public health and wellness, art, social justice, and at the core of everything, coming back to Aloha Aina. Before we start the show, I definitely want to talk about what's happening right now in the world. It's crazy out there, and on the cool, I just really want to be real. I think now more than ever, it's more of an important time for us to be kind to each other. I think the display that we are seeing right now on the national stage is one that should make us all pause. Whether you agree or not, whether you participate in the sovereignty movement or not, this affects all of us. This is a kako thing. With that being said, the opinions and views here may not be those of KTUH's licensees, management, nor staff. This conversation is very important to me because I know people that it directly affects. It's definitely something that we've talked about here on Real Talk many times. And I think it's really important not only for us as community to learn about this conversation, but also to educate ourselves, because education brings awareness, and through education, I believe we can have better connections. With that being said, I want to introduce Dr. Otto. He attended New York Medical College, and I'm probably going to butcher this, so please tell me if I did. Valhalla, New York, and completed his transitional internship and ophthalmology residency at Madigan Army Medical Center in Tacoma, Washington, before being forward deployed with the U.S. Army to Camp Zama, Japan, as a general ophthalmologist with a duty of Yokosuka Naval Hospital for 3 years. Following an honorable discharge from the Army, Dr. Otto returned to Hawaii and completed a medical retina fellowship at the Retina Institute of Hawaii, specializing in the treatment of macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. Dr. Otto is an advocate for protecting the state accepted medical use of cannabis and has been working with the state Hawaii legislature since 2012 in an effort to advance changes in Hawaii's medical use of cannabis program that will improve patient care and protect patients' rights. He is also a member of the Hawaii Dispensary Task Force and provides written certifications and compliance with state law for qualifying patients who wish to enroll in Hawaii's medical use of cannabis program. Dr. Otto is also a cannabinoid medicine specialist, having been certified by the Board of American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine. Aloha, doctor. How are you today?
Good morning, Alex. Aloha.
Good morning. I really appreciate you again taking time and for creating space to have this conversation, because I think more than ever it's very important, and I learned a lot as we were developing this talk story. And so please definitely give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself, and then also tell us a little bit of why this conversation matters. And then again, let's start there.
Sure. So thanks very much for inviting me to your show. And I really liked how you emphasized the need for education in your introduction, because that is so critical right now. I got into medical cannabis around 2011 because of a family friend who was diagnosed with colon cancer. And I was able to see firsthand how this person benefited from the medical use of cannabis. I had really had no exposure before then, and I was able to see firsthand how he benefited, being able to maintain an appetite and reduce pain through the chemotherapy and surgery and chemotherapy after surgery. And that really convinced me of the medical potential of cannabis. And then I did a lot of research on the subject, most of it from the 1970s, which further encouraged my interest in this subject, and then became involved with the legislature and the lawmaking. And that's when I really became a bit of an advocate, because I saw that there was need for changes to the program and to the law in order to protect our patients. So I'm coming at this from a patient perspective, which I think gives me a little different emphasis. I don't have any financial or commercial ties with the dispensaries. As you mentioned, I am a certifying provider, and so I do certify patients for a fee. But I think if you talk to any of my patients, they will tell you that I'm really in this for them. And this is a big commitment, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area.
With that being said, so I really want to talk about, can you deconstruct what a patient perspective is?
Well, it's pretty simple, actually. If we just put the patient first, if we just put the patient at the center and the beginning of this discussion, then I think the choices that we make are pretty simple. The state exercised its authority over the interstate medical use of cannabis in 2000 when it created a medical cannabis program, and protected at the state level the right of patients to engage in the personal use of cannabis for medical purposes. And so that certainly gave patients access under state law, but it also exposed patients to a variety of different forms of discrimination, because the state proceeded with a medical cannabis program without addressing the federal situation. And so perhaps that's a point that we'll develop during our talk story today, but that's an important issue, and I think it's a discussion that's not being had right now at the state level for a variety of different reasons. And I have latched onto that because of the integral part it's playing in the safety of our patients. You cannot be safe if you have to violate federal law to participate in a state program. So anyway, that's a part of this larger discussion of how do we keep our patients safe? What is it that they need in order to access cannabis safely? What are the obstacles? And I approach this from a harm reduction perspective. meaning that how do we reduce the harms, the risk of harms that our patients are experiencing? And I have a unique perspective on this because I'm a licensed medical doctor. So in order to, and if you don't mind, I'd just like to expand on this a little bit. In order to be a certifying provider, I have to be licensed in the state of Hawaii. But I also need what's called a state controlled substance registration, meaning I'm registered with the State Narcotics of Enforcement Division to prescribe controlled substances. And that's something that probably all doctors in Hawaii have, because at some point we need to prescribe controlled substances like pain medications. But the other requirement, in order to have a state controlled substance registration, I also have to have a federal controlled substance registration from the DEA. So that binds me at the federal level such that I cannot help patients gain access to cannabis. I cannot, what they call, aid and abet patients gaining direct access to cannabis. So that limits what I can do. And so the way that I'm able to help patients is perform the written certification and the certification evaluation under state law, and then I can provide education to help patients use cannabis safely and effectively. But it's their decision to decide cannabis. The state has protected the right of patients to decide to use cannabis in their own personal medical decisions. And I'm just trying to help them use cannabis safely. I do not recommend cannabis to my patients. I feel that I can't do that until we have an FDA-approved botanical drug product that has gone through the whole FDA approval process. And I certainly can't prescribe cannabis because it's not FDA approved and it's not available in our pharmacies. So we're in a very unique position as certifying providers because we're not treating, we're not providing treatment with cannabis, we're providing care in the form of education, which I feel is so critical as patients go through their own self-discovery with the medical use of cannabis, having to deal with the dispensaries, a lot of the information out there that I think is difficult for patients to assimilate. So that is my perspective and my approach to this subject.
If you're just joining us right now, we're speaking with Dr. Otto, and we're talking about harm reduction and medical cannabis. When we come back, we're going to talk about solutions for an exemption, deconstructing constitutional issues that Dr. Otto had just mentioned. Keep it locked to KTUH, the only radio station that loves you. Aloha no, you're listening to DJ on KTUH Honolulu 90.1 FM, Wailua 91.1 FM, channel 866, Spectrum Digital Cable, and also streaming live on KTUH.org on the World Wide Web. If you're just joining us right now, we're speaking with Dr. Otto, and we are speaking about medical cannabis and medical discrimination. Before we start, the opinions and views heard may not be those of KTUH's licensees, management, nor staff. Parental supervision is recommended. I really do want to come back to what you had mentioned earlier, but before we jump into that, what should folks take away from this talk story, Dr. Otto?
Well, my hope is that your listeners will take away the importance of protecting state medical use and focusing on our patients. From my experience, from what I've seen from my patients, I really think that this is a medicine. This is a powerful medicine that requires supervision and requires appropriate use. I don't really believe in recreational use. I think people who think they're using it recreationally are really self-treating for anxiety and insomnia and depression. And I would also argue that there is a certain therapeutic benefit to euphoria. So I think a lot of people are really self-treating with cannabis. And so if we accept that cannabis is a medicine, then it makes sense to stick with cannabis as medicine and protect that. And we're in a unique situation in Hawaii to protect our interstate medical use of cannabis. The other takeaway, I think, is that the state needs to do something about this situation. We have a program that's 25 years old, and we still haven't gone back to the federal government and tried to work out a solution so that our patients in dispensaries don't have to violate federal law to participate. And I think this is an issue that's going to become even more relevant with the current administration, and perhaps we'll touch on that more later. But I realize that patients are in a difficult position because in order to participate in our state medical cannabis program, patients have to violate federal law to participate. The simple possession of cannabis violates federal law, and there are penalties for that. Right now, we're operating under the guise of non-enforcement. And I don't think that depending on non-enforcement is the way to go. It does not protect the interstate medical use of cannabis and subjects us to changes resulting from changes in the federal administration. So patients are in a compromised position because it's difficult for them. I mean, not only are they dealing with chronic illness and having to survive on a day-to-day basis, but it's difficult for patients and dispensaries to go to the state government and say, we want you to do something about the federal situation. Oh, and by the way, we're already violating federal law. So, they've already found a way around the problem. Unfortunately, this doesn't remove the discrimination that our patients and dispensaries are experiencing. And it's not about being arrested. That's not the issue. The issue is a variety of different forms of discrimination that our patients are experiencing on a daily basis. So I guess those are my two takeaways, that something needs to be done about this. And perhaps we can talk more about what can be done in the current environment.
For sure. I want to deconstruct a couple of things that you did say, though, because especially for someone who may not use cannabis or someone who's you're informing them. Let's go back to medical versus recreational.
Well, so I already told you what my feeling is on the two, that I don't really think that recreational exists. Unfortunately, recreational legalization has been tied to commercialization, and this creates a lot of issues, not the least of which is, of course, a commercial bias, an interest in benefiting from cannabis financially. And this oftentimes moves us away from focusing on patients and what's best for them. So additionally, when you want to create a commercial recreational use program in an environment where such activity is still illegal under federal law, you create a situation where it's very difficult to take care of patients. I mean, right now the dispensaries cannot engage in regular banking activities. They cannot deduct most of their operating expenses from their federal tax returns, which elevates prices on top shelf products and makes it difficult for patients to purchase the products that they really need rather than what's on sale. And that also pushes patients back into the illicit market. So the commercialization of recreational cannabis is, I think, at the root of a lot of the problems when we talk about recreational use. Medical use, on the other hand, is something that the state controls. And when we talk about recreational or adult use legalization, there's always the risk that in the future, because of the Dormant Commerce Clause, that mainland corporations can come in and take over the local recreational or adult use market, and there's nothing we can do about it. Whereas with a medical program, we can protect medical use that occurs only within the state. And I believe that the future commercial benefit is greater in the long term for medical use, and something that the state needs to stand up for.
So what I think I'm hearing from this conversation is that going back to, we step away from being a patient perspective on regarding the cannabis by taking a recreational route. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, there are arguments that adopting an adult use program would improve access for patients. And I think on the surface, that looks like an appealing argument. But the problem with that is patients will lose access to the medical supervision that they're currently obtaining from their certifying provider. If patients are going directly to dispensaries without even talking to a medical doctor or an APRN and getting potential medical advice from a salesperson, that puts the patient at greater risk of having adverse reactions to these products.
I follow that, because it's funny you say this. So, because I just was watching this thing about Botox, and they were talking about when you go like to these spa med clinics, you get a dermatologist, certified dermatologist. They're actually not. So they're not real dermatologists, though they're using these faux names that are just little catchy phrases that make you believe that they are trained professionals, but they don't actually have the schooling and the credentialing behind that. Is that what we're saying here?
Well, yeah, that's kind of a similar situation. But part of the problem is that a lot of certifying providers are not knowledgeable enough to guide their patients through this self-experimentation process. Sometimes patients are being told, well, just go to the dispensary and ask the bud tender. They'll tell you what to do. And I know that the salespeople are sincere and really trying to be helpful for our patients. But patients will receive information like, well, this helped other patients with pain or helped patients sleep. And the thing we have to realize is that cannabis is highly individualized in terms of how it affects patients. I've never seen anything that is so highly individualized. I mean, you can take most pharmaceutical products and it will affect like 95% of the population the same way. That's why it's effective. But cannabis is completely different, in part because of variations in individual makeup, but also because of the variation in all the different type of cannabis cultivars that are being used to make these products. So it's really important that patients have access to a knowledgeable certifying provider who can help educate them through this process. And that's partly what having a medical cannabis program provides, is that ongoing supervision. And we have to keep in mind that this is still a Schedule I controlled substance. So at the state and the federal level. So we need some supervision. Even if it's moved into Schedule III, it's still a controlled substance. And with a lot of the very concentrated products we're seeing on the market these days, the risk of adverse events is much greater now, and which points to even more need for ongoing supervision.
For sure. And I feel like I definitely follow that, because like I said, when I saw this video yesterday about Botox, I'm going to be real. Who hasn't thought about getting Botox? Who hasn't thought about getting a little filler there, some Juvederm or whatnot? I'm not going to do it, because especially now that I've read that, Juvederm or those fillers move around your face, like that scares me. So I think, as anyone who's going to partake in any type of medical procedure of any kind, it's definitely incumbent upon the patient to do their own due diligence as well. But I definitely agree 100% with what you're saying. You gotta go to a provider that is going to have your best interest at heart. And I really love what you said at the beginning, is a patient perspective, someone who's going to look at it from that view, who's going to advocate for you. And again, that oversight of, okay, why are you coming to get this? And let's talk about that. And, maybe reviewing a little bit of that medical history with you. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to open up with self-treating, therapeutic euphoria, and medical discrimination. Because when I learned about some of these topics, I was flabbergasted and then some. Keep it locked to KTUH, the only radio station that loves you. Aloha no, you're listening to DJ on KTUH Honolulu 90.1 FM, Wailua 91.1 FM, channel 866, Spectrum Digital Cable, and also streaming live on KTUH.org on the World Wide Web. If you're just joining us right now, we're speaking with Dr. Otto, and we are talking about medical cannabis, and we're about to actually talk about self-treating and medical discrimination. The opinions and views heard may not be those of KTUH's licensees, management, nor staff. Some material may be inappropriate. Parental supervision is recommended. Dr. Otto, in the last segment, we had talked about people who are probably self-treating, who may be experiencing anxiety, and also therapeutic euphoria. Can we take a little deeper dive into that particular conversation, especially because, we have folks who are, neurodivergent, and, that's a term that I keep hearing sometimes. And then sometimes I hear folks, I hear about the vapes, I need the vape. The vape is just, I need it. And then sometimes I'm like, are they the inhalations that you really need? Not so much of the vape. What is your view, and how do you deconstruct folks that are self-treating with medical cannabis?
Well, so everybody who's using cannabis is self-treating, because we as physicians are not treating with cannabis at this stage. And this is based on basically, the person's right to decide what happens to their body. And patients who are seeing doctors that are recommending other treatments that they may not want to expose themselves to, like opioids or surgery, have been given this alternative form of medical self-treatment under Hawaii's medical cannabis program. So whether people have decided to register with the program or whether they have access outside the program, I think it's all medical use. And you had touched on therapeutic euphoria. Mm-hmm. That we brought up in the last section. And I think this is something that needs to be discussed further, because there's this idea that euphoria somehow from a substance like cannabis is bad. Like that indicates addiction or some type of abuse. And we have to recognize that the number one qualifying condition under Hawaii's program is severe pain, which is essentially chronic pain. Number two is PTSD. So about 25% of Hawaii's population suffers from chronic pain. It's a large number, which is similar nationally. And living with chronic pain is devastating. I don't know how many of your listeners have dealt with ongoing chronic pain, but it means not being able to function, having to deal with pain that doesn't go away every day. You cannot enjoy life. And I'm seeing this in a majority of my medical cannabis patients who are dealing with chronic illnesses that are not getting better, that are causing severe pain and other complications. And the only thing that seems to help is medical cannabis. So we don't have a lot of great studies on using cannabis for different conditions. So I can only speak to what I'm hearing from my patients. But it is very easy to identify a medical cannabis patient because of their goal of wanting to be functional. They want to work, they want to get through the day, they want to be productive, they don't want to be sitting stoned on a couch eating potato chips. So medical cannabis patients typically will try to use as little medical cannabis as possible in order to relieve their pain and their symptoms and in order to be functional. So I think this is an important distinction between people who are using, let's say, highly concentrated cartridges to just completely dissociate from reality. And I think you could also argue that there may be a therapeutic, although not healthy, benefit in that, Because why does our youth need to disassociate from reality? Is it because we're not giving them a future that they can look forward to, that we've taken away a lot of their hope in what they can do with their lives? So I don't think we can just say, oh yeah, young kids are just abusing cannabis. There are reasons, and we need to understand why, and we need to get them help and figure out how to make this safe in terms of public safety and public health. So that's how I would address that aspect of medical cannabis.
For sure. And I just definitely, for folks who may not be aware or know what euphoria is, I'm going to give you the Merriam-Webster definition, Boo, because here we're all about education. Euphoria is the experience or effect of pleasure or excitement, an intense feeling of well-being and happiness. Certain natural rewards and social activities such as aerobic exercise, laughter, listening to or making music, and dancing can induce a state of euphoria. Euphoria is also a symptom of certain neurological, psychiatric disorders, but we're not going to go into that part. But definitely, I think it's really important from what you said is that it provides folks the opportunity to return back or to get to as close to as to a state that they're able to function outside of pain. And I think that's the ultimate goal as a provider, I would assume. Yeah.
Well, right. Being able to relieve the symptoms that are interfering with patients' ability to have a quality of life, but also being able to enjoy life is essential to living life. Just being alive is not enough. We need to enjoy the experience. And so by reducing pain and allowing patients to be functional and improving their mood, has significant therapeutic potential. We just need to figure out how to do it safely and to make sure that patients are being exposed to safe products and are using it properly under medical supervision.
For sure. With that being said, Dr. Otto, I want, like, if you could right now talk to the legislature, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them so that we could do that and bring a safe path to access for folks?
Well, so I've been working with the legislature since about 2011, when Senator Aspero, who was really a champion of trying to help patients, worked with me on a bill to try and do research within the state. And that was kind of my first naive venture into trying to do research and trying to help patients. And so I've learned a lot about the legislature over the past 14 years, and I have a lot of respect for the process that they go through, which is not easy, and assimilating vast amounts of information in a very short period of time. And I'm grateful to the legislature because of how it addressed this issue in the 2021 regular session. You know, I haven't talked to a single lawmaker who thinks that the current situation with our medical cannabis patients is acceptable. The fact that our patients have to violate federal law and are being discriminated against. Nobody wants to see that continue, but trying to find a path to address this situation is really challenging. Because in some ways it is extremely complex, and in some ways it's just very simple if we focus on our patients and on the state's constitutional authority. But in 2021, both chambers of the legislature adopted a resolution that asks the Department of Health to take certain actions to pursue with the DEA an exemption that would make it so that registered patients who are complying with state law would not be subjected to the penalties of using a federal Schedule I controlled substance. And as I said, this was unanimously adopted in both chambers. It has been sitting with the Department of Health since 2021. And So this would be very similar to the existing federal regulation that exempts members of the Native American Church from the criminal penalties and discrimination that come along with using peyote, which is also still a Schedule I controlled substance. So if it's possible for a church to get an exemption for its members, then certainly it seems that it should be possible for a state to get an exemption for its registered patients. And this is another instance where I think sticking with medical use makes more sense, because we know who these registered patients are. We have a list of patients, and we can say, these are the people who this federal exemption would apply to. They are not using cannabis as a federal Schedule I drug. We're going to leave it to the state to regulate these patients, and that would potentially open up the possibility of our dispensaries being producers for this exempt class of users without having to violate federal law. So that's the pathway, and at least we need to have some discussion about the viability of that. I know it's a valid argument. It's just a matter of getting the political will necessary to have that discussion so that we can move this issue forward.
For sure. When we come back, we're going to talk about cannabis with your medical professional, how to talk to your medical professional, as well as medical discrimination, and we'll see what else we can throw in our last segment. Keep it locked to KTUH, the only radio station that loves you. Aloha no, you're listening to DJ Ono on KTUH Honolulu 90.1 FM, Wailua 91.1 FM, channel 866, Spectrum Digital Cable, and also streaming live on KTUH.org on the World Wide Web. If you're just joining us right now, we're speaking with Dr. Otto, and we are talking about medical discrimination and also how to talk to your medical professional about cannabis, medical cannabis. Some material may be inappropriate for children. Parental supervision is recommended. The opinions and views heard may not be those of KTUH's licensees, management, nor staff. Dr. Otto, so, for me, I've actually talked to all my friends about the importance of getting a 329 card. Some folks are receptive to it. Some folks are like, check with me in a year. How does someone begin to have that conversation? And then what if your provider's just not open to it?
So I encourage patients who are interested in using medical cannabis to register with the program if it's something that they can feel comfortable with. If you're using cannabis without being a patient, then you're violating state and federal law. So at least by joining the program, patients can comply with state law. They do have access to the dispensaries, but it also provides the ability for patients to grow their own cannabis. And patients can grow 10 plants currently under state law and put those plants wherever they have permission from the property owner. And I think there's great potential for patients to produce their own high quality cannabis for medical purposes, knowing exactly what's going into their medicine. Our program started in 2000 with only personal cultivation. And so that is something that I think can be great benefit to a lot of patients. But patients, I think, need to have an interest in complying with state law. And I know the law is not written very well. There are a lot of gray areas that set up patients for potential unlawful raids and seizures, which have fortunately decreased in recent years. But I believe that, generally speaking, society works best when we follow the laws and the rules and we kind of police ourselves. Unfortunately, the current environment of having a program that violates federal law and relying on non-enforcement is sending the message to our residents that law doesn't really matter. We don't need to comply with the law. We just need to figure out how to get around the law. And that's sending the wrong message, I think, to our residents and our patients. which unfortunately leads to further disregard for the rule of law and even more criminal activity. So I think joining the program makes sense if patients believe in following the law and want to enjoy the protections that the state program provides. I realize it's not perfect, but staying outside the program and contributing to the illicit market, I think, only prolongs the problem.
For sure. What about medical discrimination?
So patients are experiencing a variety of forms of discrimination, partly because of the stigma that's still associated with cannabis in general, but also because they have to violate federal law to participate. The dual-use cannabis task force that occurred a couple of years ago did a rapid survey during the task force to look at what percentage of patients and providers were being affected by the federal situation. And they found that 25% of patients and nearly 25% of certifying providers felt that the federal situation was interfering with their ability to properly engage in the medical use of cannabis and talk to patients. So this is a significant number. The number one problem right now is employment, because drug testing is left up to the employer. So you can have some employers who don't drug test at all, some that will do a pre-screening drug test and then they won't do any drug tests afterwards, and some that adhere to a federal zero tolerance policy where you can never use cannabis because they'll do randoms during your employment and you could risk disciplinary action or termination. And addressing this at the state level is one way to approach it, but we have a lot of federal employees, federal contractors who will never be able to use cannabis as long as we have this situation with federal law. So that's one issue. The other is patients not being able to travel to other islands with their medicine. I'm hearing that maybe TSA is not enforcing this as much, but technically traveling to islands that are further than 12 miles from the nearest island violate federal law because you got to go through federal airspace, which is in effect interstate commerce. And our pilots are not allowed to transport cannabis under federal law. Their FAA licensing does not allow them to transport cannabis, even though we have a federal regulation that allows pilots to transport cannabis if it's authorized under state law. So that's another issue. Then firearms. There have been some recent cases where judges have thrown out prohibitions against residents who want to register a firearm. I think this has been mainly in recreational use states. But still, this is a case-by-case basis, and you have to go to court, which is not an easy thing from time perspective and financially. So that's a big issue. Federally subsidized housing, medical insurance, disability insurance. There are a range of issues that patients are suffering from because of this federal situation.
For sure. And some of those things, I didn't even think about that. Last couple minutes that we have, can we talk about harm reduction?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I think a lot of the harm reduction comes through the doctor-patient relationship and being able to educate patients on how to approach cannabis safely and effectively and being able to provide follow-up. But this harm reduction also has to be addressed at the federal level. And with the current administration, I think this is even more important than ever. We're seeing how the current administration is addressing immigration. That non-compliance could certainly be turned towards states that have recreational or medical programs that are violating federal law, but I think it would be much difficult to interfere with medical programs because of the Rohrabacher-Farr appropriations rider at the congressional level and the state's authority over medical use. But we cannot continue to expand a cannabis program at the state level in the face of the federal government and just say, we don't care what you think, we're going ahead with it. I think the prudent approach is to work with the federal government I think they would welcome a state that says we want to respect federal law, but we want to work out a solution that also respects our authority over the medical use of cannabis.
And shifting topics just a quick bit, because we've come to the last bit of our talk story. And again, Dr. Otto, I really mahalo you for your willingness and openness of coming and, sharing space with our community. If you could have dinner with someone from the past, who would it be and what would you have?
What would I have to eat? Mm-hmm. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
So if I could have dinner with anybody from the past, I think my first choice would be Thomas Jefferson. I don't know why, but I have kind of a very romantic image of Thomas Jefferson, maybe from movies I've seen or books I've read in the past. But he just strikes me as a really interesting character, someone who is integral to the construction of our Constitution. I would love to just sit down and have dinner with him and get his perspective and hear what they were dealing with at that time. And if I was in control of the menu, I would probably bring some Japanese food, because Japanese food is my favorite food. I would probably bring some sushi to see, if he likes raw fish, but also maybe some grilled fish, some shioyaki that he could probably enjoy, some pickled vegetables and miso soup, and I suspect he has never had Japanese food before, so I would like to introduce him to that.
It sounds divine. I'm not even going to lie. It sounds divine. Again, I really want to haul you so much for taking your morning to talk story with us. And again, I appreciate you so much, Dr. Otto.
Well, thank you, Alex. I appreciate the invitation and ability to talk about this important topic.
For sure. And then also for our larger community, last parting words that I have for you is Ahupua'a let's start over again. Ahupua'a is also a mentality and a place we can live today. Build lahui, malama your mala, tend to your kupuna, and water our keiki. This is something that actually came to me. I found it on Kanaka Autonomy. And I really think, again, that we opened up the show. Now more than ever, I think we need to definitely help each other and be kind to each other. Creating spaces where we can have dialogues and where we can exchange ideas and where we can really this is a kako thing. This is an everybody thing. Whereas we are entering this next unprecedented time, I think that education will save us. And I think it also will help us make better decisions as we move forward. So with that being said, you've been listening to Real Talk. Aloha.